In the summer of 1980, a prominent Republican close to Ronald Reagan's campaign sought to sabotage then-President Jimmy Carter's re-election by asking Middle Eastern leaders to get a message to the Iranians.
Almost from the moment Iran freed the U.S. hostages in 1981, just minutes after President Ronald Reagan took the oath of office, there have been suspicions about a deal between the Reagan campaign and Iran.
This reporting by Peter Baker of the New York Times that there was, in fact, a secret effort by the Reagan campaign to sabotage the Carter campaign by urging the Iranians to hold the American hostages until after that year's presidential election. How does it fundamentally change our understanding of American history and of the Carter presidency?
Well, this is a pretty big deal because what you have is the campaign of a candidate for president who is prolonging the captivity of Americans at the U.S. Embassy in Tehran in order to achieve a political victory.
This was the first high-level official of any government that had specifically identified the fact that the Reagan administration was trying to make contact with Iran and tell them that they should keep the hostages until after the election of Jimmy Carter. Well, my book had dozens and dozens of sources, but a lot of them were people that you wouldn't trust. You wouldn't want to go to a birthday party with these guys. Arms dealers, people who were on the fringes of all of the black operations that were going on around the world. And so their word, which was pretty much that the Republicans wanted to keep the hostages in place until after the election, that view was held by a great many people. And it was held by a lot of people in the Middle East. But of course, I'm quite accustomed working in the Middle East to the fact that there are conspiracy theories going on all the time. So I didn't pay too much attention to them at the beginning.
There was a flurry of activity in the Iranian parliament that they were going to vote on whether or not to release the hostages. Just before the votes were cast in this country, the parliament decided, under Khomeini's pressure, that they would not release the hostages, and this devastating negative news about hostages swept the country right on Election Day. I've always been convinced that this was a major factor.
It's an extremely unpatriotic move on the part of William Casey, who was Ronald Reagan's campaign manager and later his director of the CIA.
William Casey was the campaign chairman in 1980 in the Reagan administration. He was the director of the CIA. Based on what you know about him, is it conceivable that he could have been behind all this?
We know for a fact that he actually made a trip to Madrid, where we believe he met with Iranian officials. The amazing thing is that Mr. Barnes waited for 43 years to tell his story. And it's really too bad, because I think the American people would really have deserved to know if something like this happens, if an election is being fixed. We ought to know about it. And I'm sorry that this story didn't come out much, much sooner.
In some ways, he spoke truth to power, and he was willing to take that risk and to stand up to these powerful foreign countries. So he nationalized the oil in 1950 and basically kicked the British out. And the British had by that point a very long history of dominating the oil in the south of Iran. But that's very much the reason why Mossadegh was such a powerful and such a popular leader in Iran. Once he kicked the British out, the British thought that they needed to do something in order to get back in and in order to be able to have control over oil again. Because if you don't have control over resources like that, it's very difficult for you to maintain your empire. And so they began to try to convince the Americans, Eisenhower at the time, that Mohammad Mossadegh is a communist, even though on the ground that's actually not what was going on. And so the CIA and the MI6, the British intelligence agency, created a coup in Iran in 1953. So it removed that prime minister and it reinstated the Shah. This became a huge moment in Iranian history and U.S.-Iran relations because many Iranians felt that the United States intervened in its domestic politics and took away someone who many people felt was doing the right thing for Iran and then instead instated a dictator. And then once the coup happened, both British and American oil companies got, again, very favorable contracts over the oil in Iran.
The Ayatollah, while publicly denouncing the United States and Israel, was secretly accepting weapons and money from these two countries, and Reagan, who championed American democracy during the Cold War, was making deals with America's enemies.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
This revelation makes the supposedly anti-imperialist tanky position, as well as the right-wing conservative warhawk position, appear more as posturing than genuine commitment to their respective ideologies. It exposes the hypocrisy of political leaders who prioritize their strategic interests and personal gains over the well-being of their respective nations. This, in turn, leads to an erosion of trust between governments and their citizens, fueling skepticism, disillusionment, and a sense of betrayal. Pursuing strategic interests over ideological or moral considerations complicates the resolution of international conflicts, undermines diplomatic efforts, and generates mistrust among nations, making it difficult to establish cooperation in future negotiations. The discrepancy between the public rhetoric and behind-the-scenes actions of both the Ayatollah and Reagan demonstrates that ordinary people often have more in common with each other across borders than they do with their own leaders, who hold positions of power and privilege. These leaders may engage in clandestine activities that serve their personal or political agendas, while the general public bears the consequences of such actions. This situation underscores the importance of recognizing the shared humanity among people, regardless of political ideology, and the need to hold political leaders accountable for their actions. There are several groups and organizations that oppose the Islamic Republic of Iran, both domestically and internationally. Some of these groups have political, ideological, or religious motivations for their opposition. Here are a few notable examples, but keep in mind that these groups have different goals, methods, and ideologies, and the situation is subject to change over time. People's Mojahedin Organization of Iran, established in 1965, the PMOI is a secular, socialist, and militant organization that opposes the Iranian government. The group aims to establish a democratic and secular government in Iran. MEK has been involved in numerous armed conflicts and violent incidents over the years, and it has been designated as a terrorist organization by some countries. National Council of Resistance of Iran, NCRI. The NCRI is an umbrella organization of Iranian opposition groups. It was founded in 1981 and is committed to the establishment of a democratic, secular, and non-nuclear Iran. Kurdish opposition groups. There are several Kurdish opposition groups in Iran that seek greater autonomy or independence for the Kurdish regions. These groups include the Democratic Party of Iranian Kurdistan, PDKI, the Komala Party of Iranian Kurdistan, and the Kurdistan Free Life Party, PJAK. Balochistan opposition groups, Balak groups such as the Balochistan Liberation Front, BLF, and the Balochistan People's Party, BPP, oppose the Iranian government due to grievances around political and cultural marginalization. There are Iranian monarchists who advocate for the restoration of the Pahlavi dynasty, which was overthrown during the Iranian Revolution in 1979. They are represented by groups like the Constitutionalist Party of Iran and the National Front of Iran, as well as by the exiled Prince Reza Pahlavi. Iranian Green Movement. The Green Movement is a political movement in Iran that arose after the disputed 2009 presidential election. It is a pro-democracy movement that advocates for political reform and greater freedom of expression. The Green Movement is not a formal organization, but it has many supporters within Iran and abroad. International opposition. Iran faces opposition from several countries, primarily the United States, Israel, and some Gulf Arab states. These countries criticize Iran's human rights record, nuclear program, and support for militant groups in the region. They often impose economic sanctions and exert diplomatic pressure on Iran. In addition, there are several other separatist and opposition groups within Iran. Some of these groups have regional, ethnic, or religious motivations for their opposition to the Iranian government. Arab separatists, Awaz National Resistance, ANR. This group seeks greater autonomy or independence for the Arab-majority region of Khuzestan in southwestern Iran. Azerbaijani separatists, South Azerbaijan National Awakening Movement, Sanam. This organization advocates for the rights of the Azerbaijani minority in Iran and seeks autonomy or independence for the Azerbaijani majority regions in the northwestern part of the country. Turkmen separatists, Iranian Turkmen Front. This group represents the interests of the Turkmen minority in Iran and seeks greater autonomy or independence for the Turkmen majority regions in northeastern Iran. Luristan separatists, Luristan National Movement. This organization advocates for the rights and autonomy of the Lur people, an ethnic minority living in the southwestern part of Iran. Qashqai separatists, Qashqai National Movement. This group represents the Qashqai, a Turkic-speaking nomadic ethnic group in southern Iran, and seeks greater autonomy or independence for their people. Ismaili opposition, Iranian Ismaili Revolutionary Front. This group seeks to establish a separate Ismaili state in Iran, representing the interests of the Ismaili minority, a branch of Shia Islam. These groups vary in terms of their goals, methods, and influence. Some are small and have limited impact, while others have more extensive support networks and a history of armed conflict with the Iranian government. Additionally, the situation is subject to change over time as new groups may emerge and existing groups may evolve or dissolve. There are also other smaller or less known opposition and separatist groups in Iran. These groups may have limited influence or represent specific regional or ethnic interests. Here are a few more examples. Gilan Independence Movement. This group seeks autonomy or independence for the Gilan region in northern Iran, home to the Galaki ethnic group. Mazandaran Independence Movement. This organization advocates for the rights and autonomy of the Mazandarani people, an ethnic minority living in the northern part of Iran along the Caspian Sea coast. Khorasan Independence Movement. This group represents the interests of the people in the Khorasan region in northeastern Iran and seeks autonomy or independence for their area. Tudeh Party of Iran, founded in 1941. The Tudeh Party is a communist political party that has historically opposed the Iranian government, both during the Pahlavi dynasty and the Islamic Republic. Pan-Iranist Party. This nationalist political party opposes the Islamic Republic and seeks to create a united Iran that includes all ethnic groups and territories historically associated with Iran, such as parts of Afghanistan, Iraq, and the Caucasus. The Pan-Iranist Party is a nationalist political party that seeks to create a united Iran that includes all ethnic groups and territories historically associated with what may be called Persia. The party advocates for a secular and nationalist government in Iran. The Workers' Communist Party of Iran, WCPI, HB Communist Kyrgyz Yern, is a Marxist political party in Iran that was founded in 1991. The party is based on the principles of Marxism-Leninism and advocates for a socialist state in Iran. The party supports workers' rights, labor rights, gender equality, and social justice. The party has been critical of the Islamic Republic and has advocated for democratic governance and human rights in Iran. The party has faced significant challenges in operating within the Iranian political landscape, including government repression and restrictions on political activities. The party has also been involved in various labor movements and protests in Iran, advocating for workers' rights and better working conditions. The Alliance of Builders of Islamic Iran is a political party in Iran that was founded in 2003. The party describes itself as a conservative party that is committed to the principles of the Islamic Revolution of 1979 and supports the leadership of the Supreme Leader of Iran. The party has been associated with the pragmatic conservative faction in Iranian politics and has supported policies that promote economic growth and development, social welfare, and national security. The party has been represented in the Iranian parliament since 2004 and has had a significant influence on Iranian politics. Let's focus specifically on Iranian communists we haven't mentioned so far, as they are obviously always fighting each other, just like communists everywhere else. Iranian People's Fedai Guerrillas, FDN KLQ. Established in the 1970s, this Marxist-Leninist organization was involved in armed struggle against the Pahlavi dynasty and later the Islamic Republic. The group split into several factions over time, including the majority and minority factions, with differing views on strategy and ideology. 2. There are also Maoist in Iran, another communist party of Iran, Marxist-Leninist Maoist. The party is based on the principles of Marxism-Leninism Maoism and advocates for a socialist state in Iran. The party views imperialism, both foreign and domestic, as the main enemy of the Iranian people and calls for a revolutionary struggle against imperialism and the Islamic Republic. The party believes in the necessity of a revolutionary armed struggle to overthrow the current regime and establish a socialist government that serves the interests of the working class and the oppressed masses. The party also supports the liberation struggles of other oppressed nations and peoples around the world and advocates for international solidarity among socialist and communist organizations. All these communist groups in Iran are separated by various ideological differences. The parties often have different interpretations of Marxism-Leninism, and some incorporate additional ideological influences, such as Maoism or Hekmatism. Before talking about Hekmatism, let's just quickly go through specifically why there are differences in Marxist ideology, strategic disagreements. The groups may have different approaches to achieving their goals, with some advocating for armed struggle, while others promote peaceful political activism or focus on specific issues like workers' rights. Historical developments. Iranian politics and the broader communist movement have evolved over time, leading to the emergence of new parties and the decline or dissolution of others. Internal splits within the organizations have also contributed to the formation of new groups. Government repression. The Iranian government has historically cracked down on communist and leftist groups, leading to the weakening, fragmentation, or banning of these organizations. Hekmatism is a political and philosophical ideology that is based on the ideas of Mansour Hekmat, an Iranian Marxist thinker and political activist who was the founder of the Worker Communist Party of Iran. Hekmatism combines Marxist and socialist theories with humanism and secularism, emphasizing the importance of individual freedom, democracy, and human rights. It rejects religious dogma and theocracy and advocates for a secular and democratic government that is based on the principles of social justice, equality, and human dignity. Hekmatism also emphasizes the importance of class struggle and revolutionary action as the means to achieve social and economic equality and to overthrow the existing capitalist and oppressive systems. The ideology has been influential among leftist and progressive groups in Iran and has been used to criticize the Islamic Republic's policies and political system. So there are varying degrees of socialism that are religious or secular in nature. So let's focus on that for a moment. If you watch my videos, you would know that I am a fan of Habermas and various questions about religion in the public sphere. Please take a look at my Ritual Traces series for that. For this question, we can look to the work of Abdul Karim Soroush.
Do you see that trend as well? A sort of Muslim democracy, not following exactly, but following a similar pattern as we saw with Christian democracy, embracing democratic institutions and yet holding on to some religious identity. Is that a trend throughout the Muslim world?
Well, I mean, there are a number of issues here. First of all, I mean, democracy in Islam nowadays somehow resembles the issue that I mentioned earlier. I mean, the conflict between science and religion. Now, democracy is like a scientific issue, something that is coming from the West, something which is a product of human beings, something that maybe is an alternative to religious teachings. So most of the religious reformers and thinkers are thinking about the reconciling, making a kind of compatibility between the two. So the whole issue of the conflict between science and religion now revives itself, reshapes itself in the relationship or perhaps the contrast between religion and democracy on the one hand. And on the other, of course, I mean, again, to emphasize on the differences rather than resemblance, I would say that one has to not to overlook the difference between the religious establishment in Islam and the religious establishment in Christianity. They are very different from each other. Of course, there is an Ayatollah in Rome, as you say. And of course, there are Ayatollahs in Islam everywhere in Iran and elsewhere. But nevertheless, let us not, overlook the differences between the two. There is no single person in the whole world of Islam, be it Shi'i or Sunni, who speaks for Islam, who offers you the official interpretation of Islam, whose words has got the authority that everybody has to obey, or perhaps who is infallible, much more importantly, because, Pope ex officio is infallible. Whatever he says about religious matters is considered to be infallible. But in Islam, you don't have such a thing. You don't have such a position. You don't have such an office. Everybody is considered to be fallible, first of all. Secondly, there are so many voices all over the Islamic world. In Iran even, you have got a supreme leader who has got a political office, but he is not a religious leader per se. Therefore, there are so many religious leaders, grand ayatollahs, who even are considered to be much greater than the political leader. Therefore, you hear different voices, not only in Iran, but also all over the Islamic world. And thirdly, perhaps, it's even important to take into account the Islamic rules and regulations, Islamic law, let us say, fiqh or jurisprudence. It has got a very good affinity, a very good inclination towards secularization. Again, let us take into account that secularism or secularization has got different levels, different meanings. One of the meanings or levels of secularization is just, removing the authority of the clerics, of the clergy. And that has been always the case in Islamic culture, and it is still the case. For your, prayers, for your worship, for your marriage, for your divorce, and so on and so forth, you do not need any clergy, any person who belongs to the cleric. You can do all this yourself. You can have your own individual prayers, worshiping. You can manage your own, divorce, your own marriage, and so on and so forth. There is actually nothing, and I claim it, absolutely there does not exist any religious practice in which you need the presence of a clerical person. There does not exist at all such a thing. So therefore, there has been, if you like, and I am not using this in a honorific, way. Maybe it's not a good thing, but anyway, it has been there. There does not exist a single religious practice in which you need the presence of a clerical person, a clergy. And this is part of the meaning of secularization or secularism, which has been already there, embedded in the teachings of Islam. There is only one single issue or one single area which is much disputed, and that is, the role of the political leadership. Is political leadership secular, like any other practice in Islam, or perhaps that is something which is to be done or to be, practiced by a clerical person? This is now the dominant view in Iran, and because of that, we have got a so-called religious state. But otherwise, the rest is supposed to be secular. Therefore, again, there are differences which are important, which has to be taken into account. In Christianity, secularization actually did have a deep meaning because everything was supposed to be non-secular. Therefore, it needed a kind of emancipation, if you like. But in the Islamic, teachings in Islam, most of what you do is already secular. You do not need to secularize it anew again. It's only politics which may need secularization. Otherwise, all other practices are already secular.
Right. Well,
These are some of the key theses Soroush holds. Religious pluralism. Soroush supports the idea of religious pluralism, arguing that different religious traditions can coexist in a harmonious and tolerant society. He maintains that the essence of religion is more important than its particular expressions, and that religious truth can be discovered in various traditions. The contraction and expansion of religious knowledge. Soroush argues that religious knowledge is not fixed or static, but rather is in a constant state of change and development. This view is encapsulated in his concept of the contraction and expansion of religious knowledge, which holds that religious knowledge is continually evolving and adapting to the changing conditions of human societies. The distinction between religion and religious interpretation. Soroush emphasizes the difference between religion as an immutable divine truth and human interpretations of that truth. He argues that people's understanding of religion is influenced by historical, social, and cultural factors, and therefore interpretations of religious texts and teachings can differ widely. This distinction allows for the possibility of critical analysis and reinterpretation of religious texts and traditions. Democracy and human rights. Soroush is an advocate for democracy and human rights, including freedom of speech and freedom of religion. He believes that the democratic system of governance is the best way to protect and promote these rights. He also asserts that Islam and democracy are not inherently incompatible, and that it is possible to develop an Islamic political theory that is consistent with democratic values. Religious intellectualism. Soroush's approach to religious thought is characterized by a strong emphasis on intellectualism and rationality. He believes that religious thinkers should engage in critical analysis and dialogue rather than merely accepting religious teachings uncritically. This approach allows for the development of a more nuanced and sophisticated understanding of religious traditions and their role in contemporary society. Soroush's intellectual journey demonstrates a commitment to critical thinking and a continuous reassessment of his views based on new experiences and evidence. While he may have been more closely aligned with the Iranian regime in the early years of the Islamic Republic, his work has since evolved to become more critical of the government and its policies. As a result, it would be difficult to find instances where Soroush has defended the Iranian regime in recent years, given his current stance and advocacy for democratic reforms and human rights in Iran. Before the 1979 Islamic Revolution, Abdul Karim Soroush's political affiliations were not very prominent. He was primarily focused on his studies and academic career. However, he was sympathetic to the revolutionary movement and was optimistic about the potential for change in Iran. After the 1979 Islamic Revolution, Soroush became more involved in the political and intellectual landscape of Iran. He was appointed as a member of the Cultural Revolution Council, which was tasked with restructuring Iran's educational system in line with Islamic values. During this time, he was associated with the ruling elite and played a role in shaping Iran's post-revolutionary intellectual and educational policies. However, Soroush's views evolved over time, and he gradually distanced himself from the Iranian government. He started expressing concerns about the way the Islamic Republic was being governed and the lack of political and religious freedoms in the country. He became a prominent critic of the regime, advocating for greater political openness, democracy, and respect for human rights. Soroush's intellectual journey and evolving political affiliations reflect his commitment to critical thinking and a continuous reassessment of his views in light of new experiences and evidence. While his political affiliations have changed over time, his work has consistently emphasized the importance of intellectual freedom, critical inquiry, and the need for religious reform and reinterpretation. In the 1990s, Soroush's lectures and public appearances were often disrupted by hardline elements within the Iranian government and society. His writings were also subject to censorship, and he was eventually removed from his position at the University of Tehran. Abdul Karim Soroush has faced significant challenges in Iran due to his critical views on the Islamic Republic and his advocacy for greater political openness, democracy, and respect for human rights. While he has not been officially banned from the country, Soroush has faced harassment, threats, and limitations on his freedom to express his views in Iran. As a result of the increasing pressure and threats to his safety, Soroush left Iran in 2000 and has primarily resided in Western countries since then. While Soroush has visited Iran occasionally and maintains some connections to the intellectual scene in the country, his ability to freely express his views and engage in public discourse remains limited. His work remains influential and continues to be discussed among Iranian intellectuals and scholars, both inside and outside Iran. However, the Iranian government's stance towards Soroush and other critical voices remains restrictive, making it difficult for them to fully participate in the country's intellectual and political life. Moving on, we can compare the perspectives of Abdul Karim Soroush and Talal Asad on secularism, science, and religion, because it will offer valuable insights into the complex relationship between these domains. Both scholars engage with similar themes and concerns, even though their approaches and conclusions differ. Talal Asad, born in 1932 in Saudi Arabia, is a renowned anthropologist and cultural theorist who has made significant contributions to the study of Islam, secularism, and the relationship between religion and modernity. His work explores the ways in which religious traditions are shaped by historical, social, and political contexts, and how these traditions, in turn, shape individuals and societies. Asad is particularly known for his critique of the Western concept of secularism and its application to non-Western societies. So now I will list out some areas where their research questions converge. The social construction of religious knowledge. Both Soroush and Asad emphasize the role of historical, social, and cultural factors in shaping religious knowledge and interpretation. Soroush's distinction between religion and religious interpretation, and Asad's focus on the social and historical context of religious traditions, reflect a shared concern with understanding the ways in which religious beliefs and practices are constructed and negotiated. Critique of secularism. Asad is known for his critique of Western secularism and its application to non-Western societies. He challenges the assumption that secularism is a universal concept and argues that it is deeply rooted in specific historical and cultural contexts. While Soroush does not focus explicitly on secularism, his work on the compatibility of Islam and democracy and his emphasis on religious pluralism can be seen as engaging with similar concerns about the relationship between religion and the modern state. Intellectualism and critical inquiry. Both Soroush and Asad value intellectualism and critical inquiry in the study of religion. Soroush's emphasis on critical analysis and reinterpretation of religious texts and traditions aligns with Asad's anthropological approach to studying religion, which seeks to understand religious beliefs and practices in their social and historical contexts. Different disciplinary perspectives. While both thinkers engage with similar themes and concerns, they approach their subject matter from different disciplinary perspectives. Soroush is a philosopher and theologian, while Asad is an anthropologist and cultural theorist. This difference in disciplinary background shapes their intellectual frameworks and the methods they employ in their work. Abdul Karim Soroush's work focuses on the compatibility of Islam and democracy, and he emphasizes religious pluralism as a key aspect of this relationship. Soroush argues that religious truth is not fixed or static, but rather in a constant state of change and development. He maintains that religious knowledge evolves and adapts to the changing conditions of human societies, thereby challenging the notion that there is an inherent conflict between science and religion, or between secularism and religious society. Soroush's emphasis on religious pluralism allows for a more nuanced understanding of the relationship between science and religion. In his view, different religious traditions can coexist harmoniously with secularism and scientific knowledge, as long as they are open to reinterpretation and adaptation in light of new evidence and changing circumstances. Soroush's commitment to intellectualism and critical inquiry in religious thought also helps bridge the gap between science and religion, as it encourages religious thinkers to engage with scientific discoveries and the natural world in a spirit of open-mindedness and intellectual curiosity. In contrast, Talal Asad's work focuses primarily on the critique of Western secularism and its application to non-Western societies. Asad challenges the assumption that secularism is a universal concept and argues that it is deeply rooted in specific historical and cultural contexts. He contends that secularism, as it is commonly understood in the West, cannot simply be transplanted into other societies without taking into account their unique historical, social, and cultural circumstances. Asad's critique of secularism also extends to the relationship between science and religion. He argues that the modern Western concept of secularism is closely linked to the rise of modern science and the demarcation of the natural world from the religious realm. In Asad's view, this demarcation is not an inherent feature of all societies or religious traditions, but rather a historical and cultural construct that has emerged in specific contexts. Consequently, he suggests that the relationship between science and religion cannot be understood in isolation from the broader social and cultural forces that shape their interaction. Asad's work also highlights the ways in which science and religion can be intertwined in complex and unexpected ways, particularly in non-Western societies. He demonstrates that religious beliefs and practices are often deeply embedded in the social and cultural fabric of these societies and cannot be easily separated from other domains, such as science and politics. As a result, Asad's perspective challenges the assumption that there is a clear and unambiguous distinction between science and religion, or between secularism and religious society in all contexts. Despite these differences, both scholars emphasize the importance of understanding the social and cultural contexts in which science, religion, and secularism interact, and both recognize that the relationship between these domains is more complex and multifaceted. Now, the reason why I focus on these two thinkers is that they both recognize that the notion of secularity that emerged in the Christian post-Abrahamic world could be much different than any form of secularism that could possibly emerge in the Muslim post-Abrahamic world. So then the question becomes, are these people ready for democracy? This question is rooted in the idea that certain cultural, social, economic, or political conditions must be in place for democracy to take root and function effectively. Critics of this perspective argue that such assumptions can be used to justify continued autocratic rule or foreign intervention under the pretext of guidance or preparation. The factors that are often cited as necessary for a successful democratic transition include a robust civil society, a strong network of independent organizations such as labor unions, professional associations, and advocacy groups can provide a foundation for democratic institutions and serve as a check on government power. Rule of law, a well-functioning legal system that protects individual rights, enforces contracts, and ensures equal treatment under the law is critical for the success of a democratic system. Political culture, democratic norms and values such as tolerance, compromise, and respect for minority rights need to be internalized by the population to create a political environment conducive to democratic governance. Economic development. Some argue that a certain level of economic development is necessary for democracy, as higher levels of wealth and education can lead to greater political engagement and support for democratic values. State institutions, effective state institutions, including a capable bureaucracy and an independent judiciary, are needed to administer and enforce democratic rules and procedures. So now we can move towards the case of a possible Islamic socialism or Islamic secular democracy. Perhaps these are what National Council of Resistance of Iran, NCRI, or the People's Mujahideen of Iran, MEK, are trying to allude to. Unfortunately, both organizations are under the same umbrella and have been accused of growing cult of personality behind Masoud Rajavi and his wife Mariam Rajavi. Unfortunate, because they seem to have some convincing positions. Let's discuss the group for a moment. Mojahedin-e-Khalq, MEK, also known as the People's Mojahideen Organization of Iran, PMOI, was founded in 1965 by a group of leftist intellectuals and dissidents, primarily as a response to the Shah's repressive regime. The organization combined elements of Marxism and Shiite Islam to create a revolutionary ideology that sought to overthrow the Shah and establish a new political system in Iran. The MEK's ideology was primarily based on the following principles: anti-imperialism. The MEK was fiercely opposed to foreign intervention and imperialism, particularly the influence of the United States and the United Kingdom in Iran. They blamed these powers for propping up the Shah's regime and enabling his oppressive rule. The MEK sought to establish a truly independent Iran, free from foreign influence. Islamic socialism. The MEK's unique interpretation of Islam was heavily influenced by Marxist principles, particularly the concepts of class struggle and wealth redistribution. They believed that Islam inherently called for social justice and the establishment of an egalitarian society. To achieve this, the MEK advocated for a socialist state that would nationalize key industries, redistribute wealth, and provide social welfare for all Iranians. Democratic governance. The MEK believed that political power should be derived from the people, and they called for a democratic system that would allow for free and fair elections, a multi-party system, and the protection of individual rights. They viewed the Shah's regime as an illegitimate dictatorship that denied Iranians their basic political rights. Women's rights. The MEK placed a significant emphasis on women's rights, arguing that the emancipation of women was essential for Iran's progress. They sought to dismantle traditional patriarchal structures and promote gender equality through education, political representation, and economic opportunities. Religious pluralism. Although the MEK's ideology was rooted in Shiite Islam, they advocated for religious tolerance and pluralism. They believed that all Iranians, regardless of their religious beliefs, should be treated equally under the law and have the right to practice their faith freely. Despite the MEK's commitment to Islamic principles, their Marxist leanings and revolutionary approach set them apart from the traditionalist Shiite Islam promoted by Ayatollah Khomeini and his followers. Khomeini's vision of an Islamic state was centered around the concept of velayat-e-faqih, or the guardianship of the Islamic jurist, in which the supreme leader, a religious figure, would hold ultimate authority over the state. Khomeini and his supporters rejected Marxism as incompatible with Islam, arguing that leftist ideologies were materialistic and atheistic in nature. As the Iranian Revolution unfolded, the MEK initially cooperated with Khomeini's forces in their shared goal of overthrowing the Shah. However, the ideological differences between the MEK and the pro-Ayatollah faction soon became apparent. As the new Islamic Republic began to consolidate power, Khomeini moved to suppress leftist opposition, including the MEK. The MEK, in turn, began to view Khomeini's regime as a betrayal of the revolution's original goals, as it failed to deliver on promises of democracy, social justice, and women's rights. The MEK's increasing opposition to the new Islamic Republic led to tensions and eventually outright conflict with the Iranian government. As Khomeini's regime intensified its crackdown on leftist groups, the MEK transitioned from a primarily political organization to a militant one. They launched a series of attacks against the Iranian government, targeting high-ranking officials and infrastructure in an effort to undermine the regime. In response, the Iranian government launched a brutal campaign of repression against the MEK and other leftist groups, resulting in thousands of arrests, tortures, and executions. The MEK's leadership was forced into exile, primarily in France and later in Iraq, where they established a base of operations and continued their armed struggle against the Iranian government. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, the MEK's armed campaign continued, with attacks both inside and outside Iran. The organization also garnered international attention, as it was designated as a terrorist group by various countries, including the United States, the United Kingdom, and the European Union, due to its violent tactics and history of targeted killings. However, the MEK has also undergone significant ideological and organizational changes in the years following the Iranian Revolution. They have renounced violence, distancing themselves from their militant past, and have sought to reposition themselves as a democratic opposition group advocating for human rights and regime change in Iran. In recent years, the MEK has focused on building international support for its cause, engaging with policymakers and opinion leaders in the West to raise awareness of human rights abuses in Iran, and to promote a peaceful transition to a democratic government. The group has also invested significant resources in lobbying efforts and public relations campaigns to shed its image as a terrorist organization. Despite these efforts, the MEK remains a highly controversial group, both inside and outside Iran. Critics argue that the organization has evolved into a cult-like entity, with strict control over its members and an intense focus on the cult of personality surrounding its leaders, Massoud and Maryam Rajavi. Furthermore, some argue that the MEK's historical ties to the former Iraqi regime under Saddam Hussein and its involvement in the Iran-Iraq War have damaged its credibility and support among the Iranian population. Regardless, the 1979 Iranian Revolution brought together various factions with different ideologies and goals, including the MEK, which sought a unique blend of Islamic and Marxist principles. The Ayatollah Khomeini and his followers, on the other hand, advocated for a theocratic Islamic state. One could argue that Khomeini's brand of Shiite Islam played a unifying role, as it appealed to a broad segment of the Iranian population, particularly the conservative rural and urban poor. This allowed Khomeini's faction to consolidate power and establish a theocratic regime that has endured for decades. One could perhaps make the same argument for any future regime in Iran. It must negotiate somehow with Islam, or better yet, start a modern bottom-up reformation, as I think Prof. Sarouche argues for. Finally, we reach the Iranian diaspora, who have a significant portion of support for some form of monarchy or constitutional monarchy. These individuals generally view the era of the Shah and the Pahlavi dynasty as a period of relative stability, modernization, and national pride. They often advocate for a return to a constitutional monarchy in which the monarch would serve as a symbol of national unity, while a democratically elected government would handle day-to-day governance. In my view, they are stuck in the trauma of nostalgia. Reza Pahlavi, the eldest son of the late Shah of Iran, has been an active figure within the Iranian diaspora and has participated in public forums, interviews, and debates. He has advocated for a secular and democratic Iran and has garnered support among some Iranians who view his family's rule as a preferable alternative to the current Islamic regime. Critics argue that Reza Pahlavi's association with the Pahlavi dynasty and the Shah's autocratic rule undermines his credibility as a champion for democracy and human rights. The Shah's regime was known for its secret police force, Savak, widespread censorship, and suppression of political dissent. Critics contend that the return of the Pahlavi family to power could risk a resurgence of authoritarianism. While Reza Pahlavi has expressed support for a constitutional monarchy in Iran, it is unclear what role he envisions for himself in such a system. Some critics argue that his ambitions may extend beyond a purely symbolic or ceremonial role, raising concerns about the potential concentration of power within the monarchy. Some argue that Reza Pahlavi's presence in the Iranian opposition serves to further divide an already fragmented movement. By rallying monarchists and constitutionalists around his cause, he may inadvertently hinder the development of a unified opposition front against the current regime. After all, what was the 1979 revolution for? Getting rid of this person's father. It undermines the sacrifices made by those who fought against his father's regime while not supporting Khomeini. Reza Pahlavi's presence in the limelight risks oversimplifying the complex narrative of the 1979 Iranian Revolution, which involved diverse factions with varying ideologies. This focus may also evoke painful memories of the Shah's repressive regime, overshadow contemporary opposition groups working toward political change, and exacerbate divisions within the fragmented opposition. Furthermore, Pahlavi's association with the former monarchy could undermine his legitimacy as an advocate for democracy and human rights, potentially hindering the development of a more unified and effective opposition movement in Iran. Not to mention, critics argue that Reza Pahlavi's advocacy is heavily dependent on the support of foreign governments, particularly the United States, which could undermine the legitimacy of his cause within Iran. Many Iranians are suspicious of foreign intervention in their country's affairs, given the history of British and American involvement in Iran's politics. Besides the Ayatollah, Shia Islam, and Reza Pahlavi, monarchy serving as a unifying figure, Iranians usually can also look to Mohammad Mossadegh, who is widely praised for his contributions to Iranian nationalism and his efforts to assert Iran's sovereignty and independence from foreign powers, particularly the British. Some of the things he is praised for include nationalization of the oil industry. Mossadegh's decision to nationalize the Iranian oil industry in 1951 is perhaps his most significant achievement. The nationalization allowed Iran to take control of its oil resources and reap the economic benefits of oil production, which had previously been largely monopolized by foreign oil companies. Standing up to British imperialism, Mossadegh's confrontation with the British government over the nationalization of the oil industry and his refusal to bow to British pressure is widely admired in Iran. Many Iranians view Mossadegh as a heroic figure who stood up to foreign domination and defended Iran's national interests. Democratic reforms. Mossadegh's government introduced several democratic reforms during his time as prime minister, including the establishment of a social security system, the extension of voting rights to women, and the strengthening of the parliament's powers. Advocacy for constitutional rule. Mossadegh was a strong advocate for constitutional rule and sought to limit the powers of the Shah and the monarchy. His efforts to strengthen the parliament and promote democratic governance are viewed positively by many Iranians who value democratic principles. The modern Mossadegh Party is a political party in Iran that was founded in 2006. The party takes its name from Mohammad Mossadegh, the former Prime Minister of Iran, who served from 1951 to 1953 and is widely regarded as a national hero for his role in nationalizing Iran's oil industry and standing up to foreign powers. The modern Mossadegh Party advocates for democratic governance, civil rights, and social justice in Iran. The party supports a secular, democratic government that respects the rule of law and promotes human rights. The party also seeks to protect Iran's national interests and independence and to promote international cooperation and peace. The modern Mossadegh Party is considered a reformist party and has been critical of the Islamic Republic and the conservative factions in Iranian politics. The party has faced significant challenges in operating within the Iranian political landscape, including government repression and restrictions on political activities. However, the party continues to be active in promoting its agenda and advocating for political change in Iran. Lastly, this whole video was basically to lay down some context about what is going on in Iran, but it was also made to say one thing that is not said for fear of disunity. Well-to-do monarchist diaspora voices are eclipsing many other voices within Iran. The adamant, nostalgia-motivated traumatic support that some hardline Pahlavi supporters have, their attachment to this past regime is so intense that it causes emotional distress if it is threatened or challenged. This intense support for the Pahlavi dynasty has had a negative impact on the ability of some people to speak out against the current Islamic regime in Iran. These hardline supporters have created an atmosphere of fear or intimidation that has made it difficult for others to express their opinions openly. They justify their behavior by claiming that it is necessary to maintain unity against the current regime, even if it means suppressing dissenting voices. In my view, for the sake of Iranian democracy, Reza Pahlavi cannot even be a presidential candidate if Iran actually got the revolution it wanted. The fact is, a vast number of the Iranian population is loyal to the Ayatollah and the clerical regime. This is because the Iranian Revolution can indeed itself be seen as a clerical and republican revolution within Islam, away from Saudi Arabia. The existence of the Islamic Republic of Iran then becomes